Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. What was most infuriating was that Celestial Virupaxa had somehow figured out a way to bring Prince Demon and Reverend Devourer with him into one of the fan ribs. The three of them had teamed up to challenge the 18th level. Apparently, Celestial Virupaxa's experiences in the fan allowed him to identify a loophole that not even Bai Xiaochun was aware of. As soon as that enormous celestial level head appeared in the desert, they cut it down. After easily passing the level, the group of three used the same method to get through the 19th level. As of this moment, they were already in the 20th level. Thankfully, the 20th level was significantly harder than the previous levels. The three Celestials were fighting a type of Minotaur-like monster. Whether it was in terms of speed or fleshly body strength, the Minotaurs were far superior to Celestial Virupaxa and his companions. In addition, these were male Minotaurs, all of them huge in size and violent in temperament. The vast plain that made up the 20th level was filled with their thunderous grunts and howls. It went without saying that the Minotaur monsters were extremely intelligent and didn't need to perform incantation gestures to unleash magical techniques. They were innately able to utilize various divine abilities, which manifested in the form of yellow halos of light that shot at rapid speed towards Celestial Virupaxa and the other Celestials. Any of them who got hit by one of the halos would be shaken all the way down to their soul. Any demigod cultivators in this situation would be defeated instantly, and then teleported out of the level. In fact, even Celestials on their own would have had trouble. Only by teaming up in a group of three were they able to hold their own. Apparently, this 20th level was a watershed mark, and therefore, was extremely difficult. In terms of the difficulty, none of the previous levels could even come close. The only person who might have had a chance was Bai Xiaochun, with his incredible powers of regeneration. Another factor that played into it was that these monsters were things that didn't exist in the eternal immortal domains. Clearly, they were native to whatever world the owner of this fan had come from. Because of how difficult the level was, Celestial Virupaxa and his companions were not able to simply pass through the level. If they had, then Bai Xiaochun would have awoken to find them further along. As Bai Xiaochun watched them fighting, he came to the conclusion that it would be very dangerous if they passed this level. Besides, he had worked extremely hard to acquire some level of authority over the fan, and there was no way he would just hand it over to someone else. It seems I really was too kind before. Alright, Virupaxa, you codger. You may be dead set on cheating, but I simply can't allow it. Trying to compete with me in cheating? Want to see how badly I'll torment you? Fudge. Bai Xiaochun hates nothing more in life than cheaters. Not having time to concern himself with any of the other cultivators in the various challenges, he focused all of his mental energy on the three Celestials from the Vile Emperor dynasty. There really was no way that he could possibly allow them to succeed in their effort. Calling upon his connection to the fan, he sent some divine sense into the 20th level to set the difficulty level as high as it would go. He held nothing back, and did not hesitate at all. Instantly, the air around the three Celestials began to ripple and distort. Celestial Virupaxa and his companions were in the middle of fighting 10 of the Minotaur monsters. The fighting was fierce, and intense booms filled the air, causing the three Celestials' eyes to flash. I have the feeling that if we can get past this level, Celestial Virupaxa said with a growl, then the levels after that will be much easier. As for who gets the legacy in the end, it will depend on luck. One of the reasons that Celestial Virupaxa managed to figure out the loophole in the levels was because of his status as top contender. More importantly, the damaged fan was incomplete, which influenced the levels within it. After figuring out the secret, he made an agreement with the other two about how to go through the levels. At the moment, Prince Demon was laughing proudly, and even the cold-faced Reverend Devourer was having a hard time concealing his excitement. Although these Minotaur monsters were very strong, all three of them were sure that, in the end, they would defeat every last one of them. Although their level of cooperation couldn't be described as perfect, they had all known each other for many years, and had worked together before. Celestial Virupaxa acted as the muscle, Reverend Devourer provided backup with divine abilities, and Prince Demon used the power of his spell formations to defend them as a group. Although they experienced setbacks throughout the battle, they still fought with skill and efficiency. By now, the Minotaur monsters were clearly running out of energy. Once they faltered, the three Celestials would make their move and wipe them out. Bai Xiaochun chuckled coldly. Earlier, he had been a bit nervous about adjusting the difficulty levels. But now he didn't feel nervous at all. Besides, he could sense that after his previous struggle with the spirit automaton of the fan, his own level of control had improved. Furthermore, his divine sense was telling him that he now had the power to delay the activation of the teleportation function in the challenges. I wonder how long I can delay it, he thought, licking his lips. After a moment, he rubbed his bag of holding, and an evil glint passed through his eyes. Meanwhile, back in the challenge, the 10 Minotaur monsters finally collapsed, indicating that Celestial Virupaxa, Reverend Devourer and Prince Demon had met the requirements and finished the challenge. We did it, Celestial Virupaxa said, smiling. Prince Demon and Reverend Devourer were both quite excited. However, as the three of them waited to be teleported out, a great weight suddenly pressed down on them from above. That aura. Celestial Virupaxa was the first to feel uneasy, considering what he had experienced before. Backing up, he shouted, something strange is going on again. It was only at this point that Prince Demon and Reverend Devourer sensed the same pressure filling the 20th level. Faces flickering, they also started backing up. That was when rumbling sounds rolled out in all directions as monstrous figures began to materialize up above. 1, 10, 50. Soon there were 100 Minotaur monsters, all of them bursting with violence and energy as they stared at the three Celestials. Then, howling, they charged forth in attack. In the blink of an eye, the lands were shaking, and the nearby mountains were trembling. Celestial Virupaxa's face fell, and both Prince Demon and Reverend Devourer were left gasping. Damn it, Virupaxa, didn't you say that nothing like this would happen? 10 of these Minotaur monsters were exhausting enough, and now we have to deal with 100? It wasn't that Prince Demon and Reverend Devourer weren't willing to go all out in their fighting. But they had barely been able to defeat the Minotaur monsters from before. And now, just when they had gotten their hopes up that things were over, they suddenly realized how wrong they had been. As the Celestials backed up, the Minotaur monsters charged through the air toward them, and Bai Xiaochun chuckled coldly. Think you can just run? If 100 aren't enough, then I'll add some more. Gritting his teeth, he decided that he absolutely had to kill Celestial Virupaxa's momentum. Otherwise, the next time the fan's spirit automaton came back to struggle for control, he would definitely take advantage of the moment to pass the 20th level. Having made his decision, Bai Xiaochun followed through. Rumbling sounds filled the 20th level as, to the utter shock and madness of Celestial Virupaxa, Reverend Devourer and Prince Demon, more Minotaur monsters began to rise up from the grass around them. One after another, they howled with passion as they charged. Even the powerful Celestial Virupaxa felt his scalp tingling on the verge of exploding. Heavens, this is impossible. Prince Demon shrieked, so close to the verge of collapsing mentally that he could do nothing other than stare at the Minotaurs around them. Despite being a high-ranking Celestial in the Vile Emperor dynasty, the type of person that countless individuals looked up to in awe, to be surrounded by more than 1,000 Minotaur monsters was something he could hardly handle. The truth was that this many Minotaur monsters was something that would cause even the Vile Emperor to gasp if he were here. It was a level of power that could very well destroy the eternal immortal domains as a whole. And although they were actually illusory, to Prince Demon and Reverend Devourer, they seemed very real. Is this really the 20th level? This must be the 50th or 80th level. Or maybe the 100th. Why is this happening? This level of difficulty is ridiculous. Ironically, Celestial Virupaxa was taking things even worse than Prince Demon and Reverend Devourer. Those two had never been specifically targeted by Bai Xiaochun, whereas Celestial Virupaxa had. His confidence had been crushed earlier, and that was not something that could be recovered from easily. And thus, the situation was even more terrifying for him. The only comfort he had was that this time, he had someone to accompany him in misery. In their dismay, they fled. Their goal was not to fully escape, but to wait for the teleportation function to activate. After all, despite being mentally crushed by the increase in difficulty in the level, they weren't afraid of dying. Everyone knew that in this trial by fire, death wasn't a possibility. The worst outcome was failure and injury. And these Celestials were decisive people by nature. Therefore, they immediately took to flight, giving up on any hope of possibly winning. Besides, running away might help them to avoid some level of injury. As they fled, the Minotaur monsters swarmed them. However, not even Celestial Virupaxa could ever have guessed that the current situation was like nothing compared to the nightmare which was to come. Bai Xiaochun was furious at how everything had played out, and furious at Celestial Virupaxa for figuring out a better way to cheat than him. He was also worried about the implications of dealing with a Celestial who could find loopholes within the damaged fan systems. Therefore, he decided that he absolutely, positively could not allow him to pass the level. It's too bad you can't kill people. I guess the best thing to do is trap him in there. With every moment that passed, he became more convinced that this was the best thing to do. Meanwhile, inside the level, the light of teleportation had begun to build up, causing the three celestials' eyes to brighten. In sharp contrast, Bai Xiaochun was not happy at all. Eyes glittering, he called upon his connection to the damaged fan to limit the teleportation function. Even as celestial Virapaksa, Reverend Devourer and Prince Demon began to fade away. Rumbling sounds echoed out, and they became clear again. Then, the light of teleportation vanished. Impossible, what's going on? Gasping, they began to dodge the attacking minotaurs, intense unease rising up in their hearts. They were now more nervous than they had been when they first saw the 1,000 minotaur monsters. Bai Xiaochun was very pleased with the level of control he had. Still not completely sure of what he could do, he began to carefully push harder to see what was possible. Lock down the teleportation power. Lock down the teleportation power. His thoughts were like orders to the fan. Immediately, ripples filled the 20th level, to the point where Celestial Virapaksa, Reverend Devourer and Prince Demon all noticed. To their shock, rumbling sounds could be heard, and although it was impossible for the three Celestials to understand why it was happening, all teleportation power in the 20th level was completely locked down. Although it wasn't permanent until the spirit automaton awoke, there was no way that Celestial Virapaksa, Reverend Devourer and Prince Demon would be able to leave the 20th level. You wanted to challenge this level, right? Well, fine then, you can challenge it day and night. Gritting his teeth, Bai Xiaochun prepared to retract his divine sense, but then stopped. Wait, that's not quite enough. I want to make sure that even when the spirit automaton wakes up and frees them, those three villains are too worn out to attempt any more challenges. After some thought, he pulled out a handful of aphrodisiac pills. It's too bad I don't have many aphrodisiac pills left, otherwise I would use some more. Whatever. This should be enough. I refuse to believe that when the dust settles, they'll have the energy to do anything else. Snorting coldly, he crushed the pills and sent the dust flying over to the minotaur monsters. As the powder spread out, Bai Xiaochun retracted his divine sense. Although he wasn't interested in watching the results, he couldn't help but savor the knowledge of what a bitter place the 20th level would shortly become. Although Bai Xiaochun wasn't watching, Celestial Virapaksa, Reverend Devourer and Prince Demon were right there. After a brief moment, the minotaur monsters suddenly began to charge them with greater fervor. Their eyes were bright red, and their howling pants caused the celestial scalps to tingle. What's going on with the minotaur monsters? Why do I have such a bad feeling about this? Damn it, have they gone crazy or something? To the shock of the celestials, even more bizarre things began to happen to the minotaur monsters. They began to grow larger, with blue veins bulging out all over their bodies. As this happened, their howls reached the point that the celestials were trembling violently in fear. Not good. From the way the minotaur monsters looked at them, it seemed that they were the most beautiful and enticing things in all creation. Soon, the minotaur monsters began to fight amongst themselves in madness to get to the front of the group. As for what happened after that, the story was never publicly revealed. Bai Xiaochun didn't pay much more attention to the 20th level. He occasionally sent some divine sense over to check on it quickly, and would usually shiver and look away. You can't blame me. Those three bastards took it upon themselves to mess with me. And they even tried to compete in cheating. Clearing his throat, he chose to focus his energy on the other cultivators. Over the following days, he got much pleasure from preventing them from advancing through any more levels. Soon, everyone was sighing. Half a month passed by in a flash. By now, more than half of the total allotted time had passed. Eventually, people realized that Celestial Virapaksa, Reverend Devourer and Prince Demon had gone missing, to the shock of everyone, and the unease of the vile Emperor Dynasty cultivators. Even Gu Tianjun and Sima Yunhua had no idea what was going on, and felt the need to be more on guard than ever. When Bai Xiaochun heard everyone whispering about the missing Celestials, he started to feel a bit guilty. For a moment, he considered going to check on the 20th level, but in the end, decided it wasn't a good idea. I really am just too kind-hearted. What would happen if I felt bad and then let them out? That wouldn't be good. Sighing, he once again began to ponder why he had this big weakness. Bai Xiaochun had a very fulfilling life in the following days. Preventing people from passing the levels, and thus protecting his personal wealth, made him come to the conclusion that it had definitely been worth it to come to this damaged fan. Furthermore, the fact that he really could prevent people from passing the levels seemed to indicate that he truly was the owner of the fan. Such thoughts, and the anticipation that came along with them, kept him in very high spirits. Even better was that nobody knew what was going on. The dismal look he kept on his face, and his constant sighs, were a thing of habit now. Another half a month passed by. Bai Xiaochun was simply counting the days until the time limit passed. However, that was when Gu Tianjun and Sima Yunhua, who up to this point had almost completely ignored him, came for a talk. They showed up so suddenly that he was startled. However, he kept his facial expression smooth. Heart-pounding, he tried to discern if the other two celestials had picked up on any clues about what was happening. That didn't seem likely, though, as Gu Tianjun's expression was as grim as it always was, whereas Sima Yunhua was smiling. After shooing away any nearby cultivators, Sima Yunhua looked Bai Xiaochun up and down and then said, "Fellow Taoist Bai, we noticed that you've been stuck on the 7th level for 2 months now, and we're wondering if you'd be interested in working out a deal?" In response, Bai Xiaochun's eyes narrowed. Sima Yunhua didn't take offense. In fact, his smile grew broader as he went on to offer further explanation. "Fellow Taoist Bai, you must have heard that Celestial Virapaksa, Prince Demon and Reverend Devourer have disappeared." Those words caused Bai Xiaochun's heart to begin to pound. For one thing, he knew exactly where those 3 celestials were. However, there seemed to be some hidden implication in Sima Yunhua's words that he wasn't picking up on. Glaring a bit to cover up his guilty conscience, he coldly said, "Fellow Taoist Sima, if you have something you want to say, just say it. Please, don't misunderstand me." "Fellow Taoist Bai," Sima Yunhua replied, smiling just like before. "I bear no ill intentions. Fellow Taoist Bai, you're originally from the Heavenspan realm, but right now, we all represent the Saint Emperor dynasty. Regarding the situation with Celestial Virapaksa, Reverend Devourer and Prince Demon, well, I won't keep anything from you. Fellow Taoist Gu and I already looked into the matter a while ago. Based on the clues we discovered, we are certain that the other 3 celestials found a loophole that let them enter the challenge levels together, and join forces to pass them." Sima Yunhua spoke his words with much confidence, and then waited to see how Bai Xiaochun would react. Bai Xiaochun quickly put a confused and suspicious expression on his face. "Most likely," Sima Yunhua continued, "the 3 of them are either stuck in one of the higher levels, or have used another trick to get into a different part of the damaged fan. Either way, the time limit is rapidly approaching. We only have about a month left. If the 3 of us don't join forces right now, then I'm afraid none of us will have a shot at the good fortune available." By this point, Sima Yunhua was not smiling anymore, but rather, spoke in a very serious tone. "I spent a considerable bit of time trying to figure out what loophole Celestial Virapaksa discovered. At long last, I'm confident that I can do the same thing. I can definitely get the 3 of us into the same level. As you may know, fellow Taoist Gu and I are both in the 18th level. We've been stuck there for a while, unable to make any progress. And thus, we've come to ask for your help, fellow Taoist Bai. We can help you past the 7th level, as well as all the levels after that. Then, once we get to the 18th level, the 3 of us can go all out for the rest of the month that's left." Back when Bai Xiaochun was a demigod, Sima Yunhua would never have directly asked him for help like this, nor told him the truth of matters. But now, Bai Xiaochun was a celestial, and although none of them had worked together before, it was obvious to Sima Yunhua that Bai Xiaochun was no weakling. Clearly, he felt that it was important to tell the truth to someone he planned to work with, and therefore, revealed all of the details up front. Then, he waited to see what Bai Xiaochun would decide. He was very confident that Bai Xiaochun would agree. In fact, after discussing the matter with Gu Tianjun, he was absolutely sure that Bai Xiaochun had no reason to refuse. After all, Bai Xiaochun was stuck in the 7th level, which had nothing to do with his cultivation base. It was a maze, and therefore, was difficult to pass through without a set strategy. If Bai Xiaochun agreed to the proposal, then he would at least get to the 18th level without any problems. And considering he would be working with Gu Tianjun and Sima Yunhua, it was very possible they would get farther. As far as Gu Tianjun and Sima Yunhua were concerned, they would be the ones offering help up front. Therefore, they didn't see any reason why Bai Xiaochun should refuse. Bai Xiaochun sat there quietly for a moment. From Sima Yunhua's perspective, it seemed he must be thinking about the possible benefits. However, what he was really thinking about was the frustrations that would come if he refused. These guys are just looking to cause trouble, aren't they? Just let me stay in the 7th level. Then, when the month is up, the fan will be mine. Why'd they have to come looking to team up? And I can't really refuse, can I? That wouldn't really make sense, and would only serve to rouse their suspicions. And considering how smart they are, they might start guessing what's really going on, and that could be a problem. Although he didn't really want to accept the offer, he knew that he couldn't refuse. How do we split the rewards from the 7th to 17th levels? He asked coldly. And what about the rewards after that? When Sima Yunhua heard this question, he smiled. Fellow Taoist Bai, you can keep the rewards for all of the levels you pass on your own. Once we start working together, we'll just split things evenly. Do you agree, fellow Taoist Jiyu? With that, Sima Yunhua looked over at Jiyu Tianjun. As for Bai Xiaochun, he was not feeling very happy about the arrangement, but didn't let that show as he also looked at Jiyu Tianjun. Jiyu Tianjun said nothing in response. He merely snorted and nodded. Sima Yunhua seemed very pleased to have achieved his goal, and was also convinced that Bai Xiaochun wouldn't regret joining them. And even if he did regret it, Sima Yunhua had ways of convincing him to change his mind. Having no further compunctions, Sima Yunhua quickly told Bai Xiaochun the secret to passing the 7th level. You destroy the maze? Bai Xiaochun said, stunned. The truth was that he hadn't even thought about the 7th level lately. However, after hearing Sima Yunhua's explanation, and thinking about it for a bit, he realized that it did seem like a good method. And it also explained why Celestial Virapaksa had passed the level so quickly, that conformed fully with his personality. He couldn't find the exit, so he broke one open. Of course, only a celestial cultivation base could be used to do that. Demigod cultivation bases wouldn't be able to. Smiling, Sima Yunhua went on to explain how to pass through all of the rest of the levels from the 8th to the 17th. In fact, from how quickly he spoke, it seemed he was much more anxious that Bai Xiaochun get through them than Bai Xiaochun himself was. Considering the power Bai Xiaochun had to control the levels, he could tell that Sima Yunhua was not holding anything back. In the end, although he still didn't really want to, he had no choice but to rise to his feet and head toward the 7th level. However, he still did his best to kill as much time as possible. There was a whole month left, so therefore, every extra day he could buy was important. And yet, Bai Xiaochun had underestimated how anxious Sima Yunhua and Jiyu Tianjun were. After 3 days passed in which he had only gotten as far as the 11th level, the other two Celestials lost their patience, and used a special secret magic to offer direct assistance. Bai Xiaochun actually didn't need to do anything. With their secret magic, the level was vanquished like an ice cube crushed by a hammer. Bai Xiaochun wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry as, in the shortest of times, he reached the 17th level in a single day. Rewards in hand, he looked around blinking. Those two bastards really have it out for me, don't they? He thought, maintaining full vigilance. If Sima Yunhua weren't so anxious, he would never have done things so blatantly. But Bai Xiaochun had just been going too slow. At that speed, it would have taken him half a month to get to the 17th level. This guy plays it too safe. Sima Yunhua thought. But even so, once he gets into the 18th level. Although he was snorting coldly inside, his expression was one of enthusiastic friendliness. Fellow Taoist Bai, I know you're a bit suspicious about all of this, but I'm being very honest. I really don't think we can get past the 18th level unless we work together. Plus, the clock is ticking. Therefore, why don't we go into the level immediately? Bai Xiaochun looked suspiciously at Sima Yunhua. As for Jiyu Tianjun, whether it was intentional or not, he was the type of person who always went around looking like his Taoist partner had just been killed, making it impossible to tell what he was really thinking. Maybe Jiyu Tianjun's Taoist partner really was killed recently, Bai Xiaochun thought. But if not, what's the deal with that facial expression? Doesn't his face get tired? He cleared his throat. On any other occasion, he would have come up with some way of parting ways with Sima Yunhua. But he was feeling particularly confident right now. Perhaps things might be different beyond the 20th level, but up to that level, he wasn't worried about anything unexpected happening. To make sure that neither of the other Celestials suspected him in any way, he pretended to think about the matter a bit more before finally nodding. At that point, Sima Yunhua finally breathed a sigh of relief. Smiling warmly, he clasped hands to Bai Xiaochun. Then the three of them headed toward the fan rib that Sima Yunhua had selected in the beginning. After reaching the entrance to the 18th level, Bai Xiaochun looked over at Jiyu Tianjun to see that his expression was as unreadable as ever. Up to this point, Sima Yunhua and Jiyu Tianjun had entered the levels to help him only after he had gone in ahead of them. Therefore, he had no idea how they went about doing it. However, after watching Sima Yunhua's double-handed incantation gesture, he had an idea of what was about to happen. A glowing ball of light emerged from the man's bag of holding. Before Bai Xiaochun could get a close look at it, it spread out, covering the three of them, and causing rumbling sounds to fill Bai Xiaochun's ears. His vision blurred, and when it became clear, they were in the 18th level. Yellowish desert sand spread out in all directions. A desolate, screaming wind hit their faces, and off in the distance, a sandstorm raged. At the moment, the only thing they could see was flying sand that seemed filled with killing intent. Did you see how I did that just now, fellow Taoist Bai? Sima Yunhua asked, casting an enigmatic smile in Bai Xiaochun's direction. Inwardly, he was chuckling coldly. He had noticed Bai Xiaochun paying attention to him, and could tell that he was interested in the trick to entering the levels. However, he had long since taken precautions to make sure that no one, neither Bai Xiaochun nor Jiyu Tianjun, would be able to unlock the secret. Bai Xiaochun also snorted inwardly, and was about to say something in response when, all of a sudden, a howling sound echoed out from within the sandstorm. The ground quaked violently as, off in the distance, the sandstorm churned, slowly taking the shape of an enormous head. From the pressure radiating off of the head, it clearly had the power of a celestial. Jiyu Tianjun and Sima Yunhua had somber looks on their faces as they looked at the head. As for Bai Xiaochun, he blinked a few times, but then quickly put a similarly serious expression on. That one little sand head has kept you stuck here all this time? He asked, looking out of the corner of his eye at Jiyu Tianjun and Sima Yunhua, sneering slightly. Don't underestimate this 18th level, fellow Taoist Bai, Sima Yunhua said. If there were only one sand head here, then either fellow Taoist Jiyu or myself could have passed the level on our own. Once you defeat the first head, 10 more appear. And after that, there are 10 giants. That level of power is what has us stuck. The real point of the level is to defeat the 10 sand giants. He was about to add some further information, but the howling sand head had begun to charge toward them. Jiyu Tianjun's eyes flickered, and before either Bai Xiaochun or Sima Yunhua could act, he took a step forward and simultaneously reached out with his right hand. As he did, an illusory sword projection formed, which rapidly solidified into an ancient greatsword. With the sword in hand, his energy surged to shocking levels. Even Bai Xiaochun was taken aback. The Jiyu Tianjun of this moment looked so powerful, and his sword so sharp, that he seemed almost unstoppable. Staring through narrowed eyes at the incoming sandhead, Jiyu Tianjun unhesitatingly slashed his sword through the air toward it. The sound of the sword screaming through the air caused the sandstorm to lurch to a halt, and the sky to tremble on the verge of collapse. Then, a boundless stream of sword chi slashed forward, destroying all the sand and rock that it touched. Crevices opened up in the ground as the sword chi moved with blinding speed, appearing directly in front of the sandhead a moment later. The head shivered, and then exploded from the forehead out. In a short few breaths of time, the entire head had been destroyed by the slashing blow from Jiyu Tianjun. Afterward, Jiyu Tianjun stood there panting a bit. Obviously, this sword blow of his was something extraordinary, and not easy for him to unleash. As for Bai Xiaochun, he stood off to the side, stunned by what he had seen. Based on the performances he had seen earlier from Celestial Virapaksa and the others, Jiyu Tianjun's sword was far more incredible. Bai Xiaochun's scalp actually tingled with a bit of fear after seeing it. I can't believe this guy is so powerful. Although, some of it is because he keeps his secrets just as good as that villain Virapaksa. Plus, Jiyu Tianjun is a sword cultivator, so when he unleashes an explosive attack, it's pretty unique. Bai Xiaochun forced himself to calm down a bit. After the destruction of the sandhead, another sandstorm sprang up, and it was possible to see numerous heads forming. Then, the ground began to shake as hands and arms stretched up. Even as Bai Xiaochun pretended to be shaken by what he was seeing, the gasping Jiyu Tianjun hefted his sword, and slashed it at Bai Xiaochun. What's the meaning of this, Jiyu Tianjun? Bai Xiaochun blurted. Naturally, he was a lot quicker to react than the sandhead, and managed to dodge out of the way of the sword chi. Unfortunately, as he did, Sima Yunhua smiled and performed a double-handed incantation gesture, summoning a blinding globe of light. Captivating radiance. Sima Yunhua shouted, thrusting his hands in Bai Xiaochun's direction, and causing the light to shoot toward Bai Xiaochun. Clearly, he had calculated the range and trajectory of Bai Xiaochun's retreat to match his attack perfectly with Jiyu Tianjun's sword. They were giving Bai Xiaochun no opportunity for escape. If that were all there were to it, it might not be a big deal. But it was at this moment, howls erupted from the sandstorm as the 10 giants rose to their feet. Ignoring Jiyu Tianjun and Sima Yunhua, and seemingly captivated by the dazzling light, they charged in Bai Xiaochun's direction. In the blink of an eye, the 10 incredibly fast giants had Bai Xiaochun surrounded in much the same way that he had seen Celestial Virapaksa surrounded in the past. If this had occurred before Bai Xiaochun performed a spirit enhancement on the damaged fan, he would have been in major trouble. But things were different now. And he had already guessed what was going on. This isn't what you said was going to happen, Sima Yunhua, he roared in rage. Calm down, fellow Taoist Bai. The truth is that there is a problem with the teleportation function in the 18th level. Just hang in there for a short bit. Buy a bit of time for Gu Tianjun and I afterward, our cooperation can continue. He and Gu Tianjun backed up at top speed, both of them performing double-handed incantation gestures as they prepared divine abilities. Bai Xiaochun's eyes widened into a glare. You tricked me. These were two celestials of the Saint Emperor dynasty, and yet they had brazenly led Bai Xiaochun right into a trap. Sima Yunhua wore a kind smile, and if you looked closely, he even seemed slightly apologetic. Of course, it was all for show. Inwardly, he was chuckling coldly. What he was really thinking was that the best way for he and Gu Tianjun to pass the 18th level was either to have someone willingly sacrifice themselves, or somehow distract the sand giants. With the extra time that would give them, Gu Tianjun's astounding sword chi, combined with Sima Yunhua's long-range magical techniques, might be enough to succeed. Up to this point, they had tried every option they could think of. Unfortunately, although the sand giants themselves were not very intelligent, making them relatively simplistic opponents, spell formations and restrictive spells didn't work in the 18th level. Getting a demigod to come in and help buy time didn't seem to be an option. Therefore, Bai Xiaochun was their best shot. Don't blame me, Sima Yunhua thought. I didn't force you to get greedy for the rewards from level 18 and beyond. Sighing, he went about with his magical techniques, keeping an eye on Bai Xiaochun at the same time. Right now, he was just as confident that Bai Xiaochun could handle the sand giants as he had been that he would agree to the proposal to begin with. After all, they were both anything but ordinary cultivators. Although his little scheme would cause a grudge, he was confident in being able to resolve that grudge later. And he wouldn't give up on the possible profits of the moment just because of that. Furthermore, Sima Yunhua had also resolved that, if the plan worked out, and they passed the level, he would still give Bai Xiaochun the share he had been promised. As he pondered the entire matter, his smile grew wider. Bai Xiaochun saw that smile and snorted coldly. The truth was that if he wanted to get past this level, it would have been the simplest of matters. But that smile, and Gu Tianjun's look of scorn, caused him to pick a different course. Lord Bai has treated these two scoundrels with far too much benevolence. Considering what I did to Virupaksha and his buddies, the fact that I did nothing more than make it harder for these two to get through the levels clearly shows how easy I went on them. I didn't push them to the point of despair. After giving them a break like I did, they go and do this to me? Bai Xiaochun knew that without his authority over 20% of the damaged fan, if he got into this position, it would have been very, very bad. He would have been unable to escape, and worse, even if he managed to hold off the giants, he would have ended up seriously injured. Even if he was given roughly 30% of the reward for the 18th level, it wouldn't be worth it. His injuries would have made him useless in the 19th and 20th levels, and he would definitely have been prevented from going in. Well, whatever. Maybe if they had been honest about this from the beginning, I could have accepted it. But instead they try to take advantage of me? Do they really think that Bai Xiaochun is that easy to push around? Eyes narrowing, he backed away from the incoming sand giants. As they attacked, and he dodged, he could tell that unless he started using some divine abilities, he wouldn't be able to hold out for much longer. This is my territory. How dare they try to screw me over here? Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath and decided not to leave. That would be going too easy on these two bastards. Letting out a shout, he shifted his momentum and began to rush toward the sand giants. At the same time, he called upon his strange connection to the damaged fan. Ripples spread out around him in the air as he slammed into the giants, upon whose faces blank expressions appeared. A moment later, a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering boom filled the air as Bai Xiaochun screamed, staggered backward and coughed up blood. I can't handle it, he shouted. You two have to think of something. These giants are so strong. I'm hurt, I'm gonna die. Then he toppled over, and lay there completely unmoving. Apparently, the sand giants believed Bai Xiaochun to have perished. Ignoring him, they turned, looked at Sima Yunhua and Gu Tianjun, and began striding toward them, vicious expressions on their faces. Damn it, that bastard is actually feigning death. Sima Yunhua's scalp tingled at the sight of the 10 giants rushing toward him and Gu Tianjun. There was no time to ponder why the sand giants believed Bai Xiaochun to be dead. He quickly finished his incantation gesture and unleashed the magical technique he had been preparing, sending a wall of flame out. At the same time, he began to back up at top speed. Gu Tianjun acted similarly. As they fell back, Bai Xiaochun lay there, expression grim. We're all celestials here, Gu Tianjun shouted, his eyes glimmering with disgust. If you didn't want to work with us, you could have just said so. I can't believe you're pretending to be dead. How completely shameless. You might have a celestial cultivation base, Bai Xiaochun, but you don't have the heart of a true powerful expert. As far as Gu Tianjun was concerned, a celestial shouldn't feign death even in the direst of circumstances. In fact, he was so angry that he was just about to shift directions and try to head away from the giants and toward Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun lay there getting angrier by the minute. Sending out a thought, he caused 100 giants to suddenly rise up out of the sand. Roaring, they converged on Gu Tianjun before he could go through with his plan. When he saw what was happening, he gasped and fell back at top speed. Sima Yunhua was equally stunned. There's actually a third phase. When Bai Xiaochun heard that, he sighed at the fact that he had too few aphrodisiac pills in his bag of holding. Otherwise, he would have made sure there was a fourth phase too. Meanwhile, more than 100 sand giants were blasting Gu Tianjun and Sima Yunhua backward across the battlefield. Blood sprayed out of the mouths of the Celestials, who despite being anxious, were simply trying to hold on for the time it takes an incense stick to burn, whereupon they would be teleported out. If it had been 10 sand giants, they wouldn't have had any problems holding out. But the sight of more than 100 had their scalps tingling in fear. Unfortunately, they had no other ideas of what to do. Damn it, Sima Yunhua growled under his breath, how could things have changed so quickly? Finally, he gritted his teeth and fell over, simultaneously causing his aura to vanish. Apparently, he was choosing to imitate Bai Xiaochun in feigning his death. Bai Xiaochun was very pleased with this. He immediately had the giants who had been attacking Sima Yunhua turn to the only other, living, target in the level. Gu Tianjun. Gu Tianjun's jaw dropped. With Bai Xiaochun and Sima Yunhua both pretending to be dead, Gu Tianjun's fate was sealed. More than 100 sand giants closed in on him with raging madness and terrifying energy. Just before they reached him, Gu Tianjun gritted his teeth, fell over, and retracted his aura. He had also chosen to feign death. Sadly, his attempt to feign death didn't work. The sand giants apparently weren't fooled, and before long, Gu Tianjun was screaming in agony. Blood sprayed out of his mouth as he was knocked back and forth across the battlefield, his heart filled with bitterness. Damn it, this isn't fair. Look, Sima Yunhua isn't really dead. Why don't you go after him? Gu Tianjun was already hovering on the brink of madness. When Bai Xiaochun heard Gu Tianjun's words, he realized that they made sense. Therefore, he sent some of the sand giants charging back towards Sima Yunhua. Sima Yunhua's eyes nearly fell out of his skull, and he began to curse like mad. What was happening seemed completely beyond reason. The giants had never seemed very intelligent, but now it was almost as if they were toying with them. It wasn't that he didn't suspect Bai Xiaochun had something to do with it, but rather, it never occurred to him that Bai Xiaochun could possibly already be the owner of the damaged fan. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.